Alrighty, Mr. Peruvian Bull, great to have you, sir. How you doing?
Hey, thanks for having me on. Good to be here, Ben. I appreciate the invite. I'm happy to be part of your, first episode, the seminal episode of your new show.
I knew that you were going to be the guy to start this because when we first met, it was the end of 2022, I think. We were eating tendies, overlooking the water. And we were just talking about, like, what are all the things that we want to do in the next few years, and, like, what do we want to grow into this decade? And you were talking about the YouTube channel. I was talking about, like, I want to start a podcast for a while. I think it'd be a super fun new adventure, and YouTube's rolling. That's going great for you. Congrats. And gotta catch up, dude. I gotta get going here.
I know. You're behind schedule, man. What's going on? You've been delaying. That's what's been happening. You've been busy.
Enjoying the life in Mexico is, and just like books, all kinds of cool things. Just like I've been really just going with the flow lately, and I love it. Just living life, and that's how it goes. Time for the next project, though. So stoked about it.
Yeah.
So
I'm glad you wrapped up the why Bitcoin only, because that was huge. I don't know if again, if your listeners don't know about this, Ben put together this huge compilation of resources concerning Bitcoin, concerning money. One of the best that I've seen. It's almost like a digital library. It's a great compendium, and I think it's needed. I can't believe no one else had done it before you. So, yeah.
The major motivator was just the amount of times that I like responded to similar things, especially from the GME friends, like very common clapbacks that tend to happen about Bitcoin and crypto and all those things that I have spent many years going through myself. Like I spent 2017 through 2020 going through like basically the exact same thing that a lot of people are right now. So I just felt responsible to throw something together to like at least have the resources that I can like share. Because like I try not to just yell at people and not give some resource to like learn from at that point. So appreciate that. I'm really happy it's out. It feels awesome. And yeah, I'll make sure to throw in the show notes too so people can see that. It's pretty massive. I don't even know how many pages it is, but it's a library.
Hey,
so
I feel that, man. I'm right there with you. With all my writings, I think I'm at like 300 pages or something. It's ridiculous. 300 or 400 pages easily.
It feels good to have like just your work out there and just be able to, and I think you can definitely agree with this, just having a place to like guide people when you don't have the time to like go through every single detail over and over again. That's been so like relieving of my mind. Like it's why I made the GME blog post and why I made the Bitcoin website. And now I made like a big Nostr post as well, like with all the different resources for learning about Nostr, because I've been super bullish on that recently. But I love doing that, just making collections of things that I can just angle people towards, so I feel like I always can end with that for people that want to learn more. So it's impossible to spend all the time in the world with every single person. Like, we are exploring all these rabbit holes all the time. We only have so much bandwidth, especially when we're opened up to social media. It's like there's no way to like go through the entire thing with someone we're not even talking in person. But alrighty, boy. Let's start with your backstory. I know that the GME squad will be excited to finally see you, and I want them to learn more about you. I've been so happy to be your friend for the last year, and I want everyone to get to know you better. So do you want to start from like where you started, like your education, and how you kind of got into the whole money side of things, and maybe a little about your family background, kind of wherever you want to start it, dude?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I was born and raised in the Pacific Northwest around Seattle area. My mom is from Peru, from Lima, and my dad is American, and they met here when she immigrated here in the 70s, and then they moved to the Pacific Northwest. My dad is a atmospheric research scientist, so he has a PhD in meteorology, and so as a kid he was like lecturing me constantly about like clouds and physics and like how weather works and all this like esoteric, I thought at the time very boring stuff, but it was really good to get that kind of scientific objectivist mindset at a very young age. And I have a couple brothers, but they're all older than me. I'm the youngest, and so I've I kind of got a lot of time with just my parents, and so that really helped to instill I would say a very like academic mindset in me. Like at a very young age, I was reading, and not like a normal amount. I was reading like a ridiculous amount. Like I was reading entire textbooks in 5th, 6th grade just for fun. And it's kind of like what a lunatic would do, but this is literally like what my parents were doing. And so to me it was normal. And then I would say middle school and high school come around, and I started to get more and more interested in finance, more and more interested in money, and just and generally like how the system works. Like how is money created? What is what happens? How is it that some people have so much money and some people don't? And it kind of, again, this backstory is super long, but the long and short of it is my mom and her family were some of my mom's ancestors were some of the original founding members of Lima in Peru. And they were like aristocrats, right? They were wealthy. And they had tons and tons of gold and silver that they, had stolen basically from the Incas, but they had all this wealth. And over the course of about a century, the family completely squandered it, to the point that my mom, even though she had come from this like well-off family, and her mother was a member of Congress, was a typewriter for Congress, and her dad was a member of Congress in Peru, they had almost nothing. They were completely broke, and they were living in poverty. And so having that happen to my family, having them see them have generational wealth and lose it completely, made me have this hunger and desire to learn. And so when I went to college, I initially started out as actually a biology major, and I wanted to become a researcher for infectious disease. And then I switched to finance and just went insanely deep down the rabbit hole, like doing classes and then at night reading 2, 3, 4 economics papers, and reading 50 books a year, listening to podcasts every single day, just like a level of obsession that, was frankly probably unhealthy. But it allowed me to basically speed run my like development of knowledge. Like in 4 years, I was able to develop an amount of knowledge that most people hadn't gotten after 20 or 30, because I just was consuming so much. And I got
something I can say and jump in real quick is that since I've met you, something I've learned about you is that you have incredible detail retention. Like I'm really bad at remembering like specific numbers and dates and like dollar amounts, but it just like stays in your head. I'm wondering like how much of that was like because you had such an early like learning that it kind of like just formed those wrinkles that would just like keep that knowledge, or if it's just natural or genetic. But the fact that you're doing so much reading and it sticks with you, that's a potent combo.
Yeah, I know. And that was the benefit, is like when I got into arguments with my econ professors, is I could just tell them, oh, no, you're wrong. Wait, you said stocks and bonds were uncorrelated? That's true for the last 30 years, but starting in 1933, the correlation broke and actually became, you said it was inversely correlated, but it's not anymore. It wasn't for the majority of the last 100 years. And then they're like, their eyes open up and they're like, what? They're like, well, what are you talking about? How do you know that? I'm like, there's this research paper and this research paper. And then, of course, they would get mad at me. So I did not develop many friends in the economics department at my college.
Professors hate him for this one simple trick of remembering everything.
Yeah. I had like an eidetic, I think it's called an eidetic or maybe photographic memory, and so I remembered a lot. Maybe not every single thing, but it was just especially all the important things that I thought were important. I just stuck in there, and so I did some like part-time research with a professor just on the side in college, and then I had an internship working for an insurance company, which was super boring. I hated it. Shocking. And I just was like, I was like, I'm not meant for this. And then, January 2021 came along, and that was a completely life-changing event for me, because again, through my readings, I had found out more and more about a broken system, about how things were manipulated, things were like everything was based on lies and sophistry, which for people who don't know means basically like manipulations and like, deception, like the way that people in debates can deceive you just by the way they use their words. Mm-hmm. And I thought that, oh wow, well, yes, there's a lot of deception, but it doesn't really go that deep. Like there's just some frauds and the system's a little wonky here and there, but it isn't that bad. And then, January 27, 28 was when I realized that this runs very deep. And, I already knew that the Fed was creating money out of thin air and that everything was, a Ponzi built on a Ponzi. But realizing that the stock market, which I thought at the time was solid, or at least semi-solid, was basically a Ponzi scheme, over the next few months, was completely mind-blowing to me. And I literally could not sleep for like 3 days. I was
think
so upset.
Everyone that was in the GME week of like the last week of January, we can all share some similar flavor of the story of like we were up all night just like watching, hitting the refresh button, like looking at the new posts and just like being part of that. So like, what was that specific period like for you? As you like when did you first hear about GME and when did you start really digging deep?
I first heard about it in December of 2022, but again, I thought it was a sideshow. I thought it was just some renegade traders, just because, again, I just read all the mainstream articles about it. And then that week, as it started to build up, about probably the second week of January, I started researching it more in depth, and I realized, holy hell, this thing actually has some legs. And so I bought a few shares. And again, like, I didn't have that much conviction, so I just bought like a couple $100 worth. And then that next week when I just saw, I think it was the Friday before, I saw it gamma ramp, or what I thought was a gamma ramp, up like, I think it was like from 50 all the way to like 90, and then get slammed back down to 50. And I was like, there's, like, that is a change. That is a huge change in a day. And I've never seen anything like this before. I'm like, what the hell is going on? There's something else to the story. And so I bought more shares. And then that next week, just seeing the volatility and then realizing that this was one of the, beating hearts of our financial. This is one of the weak points of our financial system. Just like on the Death Star, there's that exhaust vent where Luke Skywalker can shoot the neutron bomb or whatever it is down and blow up the Death Star. This is one of those exhaust vents. Just like the same way that I would say like the Fed is one of the exhaust vents. If you turned off the Fed, our financial system would collapse overnight, right? So same thing.
Mark Moss calls the money printer the Death Star, and I agree with him. Like it all comes down to that.
Exactly, man. And so I realized that I was like, holy hell, this thing could actually blow up everything. It probably would be a good thing. It's like a cleansing event that needs to happen. So yeah, man, I was not sleeping that week, and I missed some meetings, and my bosses were pissed at me, and it was crazy, but I think it was really good because that motivated me. I'm like, well, now I need to start investigating more and learning more. And I already knew about like what we talked about, the global monetary system and history of finance, but I didn't know about specifically the stock market and naked shorting and FTDs and all that stuff. That is what I learned, over the next few months. So what about you? What did you have a similar experience? Were you like completely
shocked? Dude, I had a
shocked?
heartbreaking story leading up to this. You're going to love this. So
okay.
I told you before how I did quite a bit of traveling from 2018 to 2020. I lived in Australia for a year. I lived in New Zealand for a year. Like I went totally by myself and just kind of like a soul-searching adventure. That was my first time really like doing the nomad thing. And one of my like anchors that I checked all the time was Wall Street Bets. Just like it kind of gave me some goofy little thing to look at and just like get a little laugh in each night, because it's kind of lonely when you're by yourself, like on the other side of the world. Like we kind of, as soon as you do it, you'll kind of understand, but you start getting these things that you look at that kind of like, keep you grounded in a way. So for me, just like reading shitty memes and posts about like stocks and people gambling was entertaining. So for that entire period of like 2018, 2019, and most of 2020, I was on that subreddit all the time. And in August 2020, that's when I flew back to the States and settled in and got a job again. So I was like, okay, I'm going to stop going on Reddit now and focus on my new job and be a good boy and like not be on Reddit. So I literally stopped the second that started happening, like literally within weeks, like of when I cut myself off. That's when DFV started posting, and everything started happening on like this super early level. So I just had the worst timing.
Oh my God,
and
that's horrible.
when I started hearing these stories about Wall Street bets, I was like, there's no way that something happened. Like I literally just left, and I heard my random friends from college, like my frat buddies in the group chat were talking about this. I'm like, what the heck how do they know about Wall Street bets? And so I started looking into it and just spent, like you said, all night getting caught up, figuring out what happened, who this Roaring Kitty guy was. And I very quickly knew that one major misconception people were going to have was that people would look at, like people from the outside world were going to look at the subreddit and think that they're just all insane, and they're going to totally not understand that they're actually like a lot of smart people in there saying like being goofy is sort of an outlet, but they're actually really dialed in a lot of ways. So I saw that, I sensed that misalignment quickly of like the news is saying there's a bunch of idiots. I log into Wall Street Bets and like for the first time ever they're like serious. I'm like, oh, okay, I'm something's happening here. Like they're getting serious. If they're getting serious about something, I'm going to pay attention. So like within like 24 hours of like starting to learn about it, I sold all my other stocks. I had like some Tesla stock and some other ones I don't even remember, and I just shoveled it all in. So like I was just like, I'm going all in immediately. I'm already butthurt that I like missed the really early days because of my unlucky timing. I just went for it, and similar, like you said, just that whole week and beyond. I mean, the week was just the beginning for both of us. We stuck with it. It was a crazy time though. It was really wild, and that's kind of how we both got this like random, unexpected pocket of like internet notoriety, which is just so hilarious to me. Like we came from totally different angles. Like I had basically, I mean, I followed the financial markets a little bit in a few years. Like I was investing from 2018 to then, but never at like a really technical level. Like I didn't understand the naked shorting or FTDs or any of that. I learned that as I went, but you had some background already. So you were probably looking at this through a different lens. What were you thinking? And I'm even more curious about in the months after that, when the masses just like forgot about it. Like what were you thinking during that time? Like what kept you convicted?
Well, part of what confirmed it for me was the massive FUD campaigns, right? There's that one quote, I forgot who said it. My usual good memory is failing me, but it's like a lie is only confirmed true when it's officially denied. It's something like that. It's like, once they officially deny it, it's true. And so once that week happened and that weekend occurred and all this FUD went out on what's something called SLV. And I actually know about SLV because I used to trade SLV back in like 2017 when I was a huge silver and gold bull. And I knew that SLV was a pile of dog shit because it's an ETF that's like it's unallocated silver. Like it's a black box. No one really knows what you're investing into. They can naked short it. They can manipulate it. I saw it manipulated back years ago, and I'm like, if there are actual people who are like silver bulls, they would just tell you to buy physical silver. Like they wouldn't tell you to buy this garbage instrument, right? And so that was my immediate first warning flag. And then the fact that all the media was pushing it, for days and days, and then immediately as the price collapsed, I was completely shocked because I was like, this seems kind of strange that everyone who last week was buying frantically is now deciding to sell. I would understand a correction back to maybe 200, 250, but it kept falling and falling and falling, and I was like, this is strange. And so I just kept watching it, and again, like that week I invested. I didn't go as hard as you and put my whole portfolio in, but I'd put about half my portfolio, so a good chunk of change, I don't know, maybe 10, 12K probably, which, for the time was pretty good money. And another story is I lost all my life savings at the end of 2020. So that was another problem, is I was gambling on something else, and December 2020 I lost everything, and so I was starting out fresh with just a little bit of savings and some
I should clarify, I don't consider Bitcoin part of like my stock, so I still had some Bitcoin at that time, if I remember correctly. It was kind of a crazy period, but I had a little bit of Bitcoin like since in 2018, I bought some. I was just trading it like, a shitcoin basically, just like trying to make money while I was traveling. But I think I might have had a little bit. But to me, that's like my savings, and then there's like the investing pile for like stocks, and I still think that to this day.
That's the smart way to do it, honestly. Mm-hmm. Like, you need to have that mindset of having your super safe direct investments that are like long term. I would treat my GME stocks too, because like that too, because I have some stocks in. I have some stocks in Computer Share, and I'm not touching them. I'm not selling them. They're just there. They're just sitting there, nice and safe in my book plan. Or
and
I guess,
and same for me, dude. Like, every single GME share that I got is like not going anywhere. Like, it's fully locked up, and the last several months I haven't even really followed the story that much, because I've just kind of checked in on Reddit now and then just for the memes. But I think people would agree that there's the mantra of like the DD is never done. But I would say it's pretty damn mathematically certain that we know exactly where we're sitting. We know that the shorts never close, like the math simply didn't add up. And to me, it's just like the same waiting game as Bitcoin. Basically, it's like all of these, like, the status quo hanger-oners are just going to kick the can as many ways they possibly can until they can't anymore. And it's not really worth my time to just like follow every single like development in the old system as they just kick and scream their way out. Is that kind of how you view it too? Like, where's your stance right now?
Yeah, that's essentially that's what I was going to talk about. Like, that's essentially my view. I mean, so in the week after, right, the stock price collapses, talking February 2021, starts to decline, hits a low. I don't remember where it hit, $40 a share, if that sounds right to you, 50, 40.
I think
and then third week of, I think it was third or fourth week of February, right? And I was really depressed because I was thinking, I'm like, again, I'm a true aficionado, because for me, this stuff isn't just, this isn't what I've been researching, and what I've been learning about the financial system isn't just some academic theory. It has like emotional impact, because my family lives in Peru. I have family that lives in Argentina who's living under high inflation, who's living under, their country has a high dollar debt load, and they have to devalue their currency every year just to, try to keep the creditors at bay. And so they're constantly impoverished, right? And here in the U.S., the normal American is not helped by our system. It's the American corporations and American elites who are helped by our system, but not the average person. In fact, they've been hurt more than they've been helped, especially for the last 50 years. And so I was angry, right? I was really pissed. And when GME happened, and all these memes came together with like, the Lord of the Rings setting up, and all the longs like going against the shorts as the orcs, like, I was completely pumped. I was with it. Like, I was like, my God, like, finally you can stab the heart of the beast, and we can deliver it a mortal wound, or a very severe wound, right? And then they shut down trading, and then they short the stock harder and harder and harder. And just in 3 weeks, I became like very despondent. I was not happy. I was like, I was kind of like a little hopeless. I was like, man, what's going to happen? And then
I was opposite, dude.
Really?
We had a
That's
very
funny.
different reaction.
That's
like
funny.
For me, I was just watching Reddit the whole time, and I speak the Reddit language, so I knew that throughout all of the madness of like the trading being shut down, and the buy button turning off, and the giant dip, and all the news, like, I knew that it was all just noise, and I knew that nobody on Reddit was selling. And you could also look at the math of just the fidelity reports, like the buy sell logs, for literally, I haven't even looked in the last year, because I was just tired of looking at just a giant green line every day.
With a tiny red sliver. Yeah.
There's like, you can't even see the red. It's like, literally, there's only been buying on this thing. No one's selling it, because everyone who's buying in is doing it for a much bigger purpose than like trading. It's like, this has become like a real like ground that people, or a hill that people will die on, so to speak.
Yeah.
And so
exactly.
No one sold anything throughout all of that. Like, practically no one. And then the SEC reports came out later that said, oh yeah, like, here's all the buying volume. It was all just retail FOMOing in, and here's the
short covering.
The short covering. It's like it's like smaller than the red line on the fidelity chart.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's so much data out there, and I put it all together on that GME blog post that I made. I'll put that in the show notes. But I mean, every single measurable statistic from the 140 to 226% short, whatever it was, before any of this even happened. That was like January 15th, I think, when they like captured that. It was like hundreds of percent short. And you can compare that to Tesla stock a couple of years before, which, like I said, I had Tesla. So I rode that baby out. That was like my first big winner. It was 20% short, and it went up like 1,000x.
Yeah.
And GME is hundreds of percent short versus 20. And you're telling me it doesn't go anywhere? Like, no way. And everyone's buying the shit out of it worldwide. It's like a global phenomenon. No way. So to me, all it was is a question of like, we got them right where we want them. It's probably going to take a while for this to all iron out because they have so many can-kicking abilities. And there's so many layers of bullshit. But eventually, math is going to win. And I don't think any of us thought we'd be here almost 3 years later still waiting. But I mean, these are a special breed of people. These are the gamers of Reddit who will not give an inch ever, and they are the best people to ride with imaginable. Like, they're never going to leave. They're just never going to leave, and that's why I am not selling anything.
Completely. I mean, these are the people too. Like, I remember reading all these posts about people who had suffered from the 2008 financial crisis, right? And again, I have a similar story. My dad lost his job. He actually has been basically unemployed since 2008, 2009, and like he hasn't been able to really get back off his feet. My parents did take out a small loan on the house, but they were able to pay it back. So we weren't hit horribly, but I had tons of friends who were, their family lost everything. And so seeing that injustice and seeing that anger boil back up, what I think is righteous anger, justified, like, it was extremely invigorating. I was extremely encouraged because I was like, yes, I'm like, people are getting it. Like, this is a true enemy. These are people who are shorting stocks to drive companies to the ground to profit off of it illegally and unfairly. And
with zero risk.
With zero risk.
The infinite liquidity, and maybe you can explain that.
Well, yeah. Well, the other thing is they don't have to pay taxes because when you short whenever you sell securities, the delta between the difference between the buy and the loss is your what is called like a capital gain, and then they can calculate your tax liability off of your capital gain. But if you're missing one of them, like if you buy but never sell, or if you sell but never buy, they can't calculate a tax liability because they don't have the math doesn't work. They don't have like a difference between those two figures that they can give. So if you short a stock and it goes bankrupt, you never pay taxes on it. Never. And so that's what these companies had been doing. And I was really discouraged. And then what I was going to say is that in the third week or fourth week of February, I remember the price started ripping again. Just green candlestick going straight up, right? And it happened for like 3, 4, 5 days. The stock went from like $40 up to like 160, 180. And I was like, hold on. I'm like, this is not retail. Like, whatever this is, I'm like, this is fascinating because there's someone or something or many things in our financial system that have all like basically had their hand trapped in the cookie jar, right? They've gotten sucked into this GME black hole, and now they're trying to escape. They're trying to do whatever they can. But ironically, whatever they do makes it worse, right? Like, the game theory for them doesn't work. If they short it lower, people buy more shares, their buying power increases, they buy more and more shares, and later on we learned about DRS, but they DRS those shares and take them out of circulation. And if they bring it higher, then they just increase the margin limits and start squeezing the other shorts that are in the system in the same trade. So there's nowhere for them to go. They can't cover and they can't bring it to zero because we'll just buy the entire float. So that's
the flappy stonk theory that I love, and that's like the perfect visual for me. Is that there's those two bounds. There's no way that you can win if you're the shorts that are trying to keep this thing alive and kick the can forever. It's just a matter of like, it's just going to keep getting narrower and narrower, and it's inevitable in my opinion. Unless completely. Like the absolute most insane like collusion like complete shutdown of markets, like throwing every single thing out the window in broad daylight. Like nobody knows for sure. And this is, and if we could do like a maybe transition here, this is kind of where I view like Bitcoin and GME differently. It's kind of my only two baskets. Is GME is still within the fiat game. You know, it's part of that stock market that is obviously just corrupt to shit. Like it's absolutely terrible how it's like they can do whatever they want. Basically, it's like you were saying. It's essentially just a game of like if you can bankrupt this company to death, you win. You get no taxes. You get a bunch of money, and you can just keep doing it over and over. And like there's no policing. The SEC is, you know, I mean, you can maybe talk more about the SEC. You probably have a better understanding of like the filings and stuff. But to me, essentially, that like GME is a massive. It's the MOAS opportunity. It's the mother of all short squeezes. And of course, there's great fundamental things too. Like I think it could be a really great business. They've got a lot of good things going for them. Everyone has a different reason being it, and frankly, like I joined for the biggest squeeze of all time. And that's the primary reason why I'm still there. But I would put it at a higher risk than Bitcoin. I think that Bitcoin is like the most conservative play you can possibly do because it's essentially a bet against this entire other basket of fiat. It's a bet against everything. It's essentially just if you think that the Federal Reserve and the central banks are being a little bit too belligerent and crazy with what they're doing, like everyone's going to end up flocking to a better form of money because money itself is the problem. Would you agree with that? How would you elaborate there?
Yeah, I would. That's essentially the thesis of my entire story. And you know, I can also talk about like how I started writing the whole series. It's similar to kind of what you touched on.
That, dude. Tell us all about that process and maybe give like a bit of a summary if you can.
Yeah, sure. So again, like for the past 6 years since 2016, 2015, I was nose deep in books, reading tons, talking to economics professors. I even got the chance to talk to, you know, some higher level people. Like I talked to the CEO of Countrywide Financial, who was one of the primary mortgage originators in the 2008 financial crisis. And again, he didn't know that I was like obsessed with this stuff. He just thought I was some, you know, college student at this fair that I went to, and I just was grilling him with all these questions. But like I got these opportunities to talk to these people and be fascinated by the system, but I didn't really have a place to put the knowledge. Like I just was telling my parents and family and friends about it. Most of them just thought I was, you know, a little off my rocker, a little crazy, that I was, you know, inflation was never going to come back. Nothing was really ever going to go wrong. You know, their stock and bond portfolio was going to work forever, and that I was wrong, you know. And in, you know, 2021, you know, after the GME squeeze, after I
sneeze.
You know, or sneeze, yeah, that's the better way to say it. After the sneeze and after the February spike and the March run up again, where we had that giant roller coaster day where it goes up and down 50% in a day, I was just like, man, this is insane to me that this is in such plain sight, and I'm going to start like actually talking on here. Because before I was just a lurker, and so I started talking, posting, discussing with people, and immediately I ran into arguments, right? Just similar to what you had, where people said, "Oh, well, you know, Russia will be the next reserve currency, or this will happen, or that." I'm like, no, you can't, no, because of this. Like, let me explain it to you. And I got in so many arguments that I got frustrated. I finally was like, you know what? I'm going to start posting full time, or like just at least make one big post, right? And before that, I'd actually made my first ever DD ever, which was called Citadel's Treasury Market Short, Connecting the Dots, where I built on Adabit's work. And that one, it didn't go viral, but it got like 1,400 upvotes, and that really encouraged me. And so I said, okay, I'm going to post just the first part, like the basics of the global monetary system. Very basic, very high level. I'll call it a new Rome, the dollar Endgame Part 1. Posted that. I think I told some people this, but I went outside. I was sunbathing. It was summer, you know. I'd gotten off work and sat down. I just heard my phone ding, 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 and then I went inside and I, you know, looked cooling off my phone. It was hot, and I was looking at it and I saw like 200 notifications, and I was like, holy shit. And then a lot of people were saying, this is wrong, you're stupid, this isn't going to happen. And then some people were like, hey, when's part 2? And I was like, shit, I have to make a part 2? And they're like, yeah. And so, ironically, as I was making it, like, I already had this thesis, like, in my mind, but I just hadn't explained it. And so the process of me writing it out helped me to flesh out my own ideas and my own thought process. And all my rebuttals to the common counter arguments, right? Which is, inflation, inflation's only caused by, rising commodity prices. Or inflation's caused by too hot of a labor market. And it's not money printing. Okay, well, let's talk about it, and let's talk about the evidence. And then we went further and further down that rabbit hole until I wrote the whole series, basically. And I was pointing out...
Maybe real quick, before we go further on that, we can come back to it, but something I did want to do here, just for the people who are a little bit newer, is just talk about, like, what is inflation, like, and deflation, like the two opposite things. There's so much, like, misinformation out there. But what I want to know is Taylor Swift making my steak more expensive with her shows in Seattle? Is it Beyonce?
Yes.
Is it Halo? I saw, like, no, not Halo. It was Zelda. Like, some new Zelda game came out, and there was a headline, like, all these gamers are just spending so much money and it's causing inflation. So what is inflation, my friend? Can you walk us through it?
Sure. So Milton Friedman famously said, inflation is everywhere and anywhere, inflation is a monetary phenomena, right? So when you think inflation as it's currently, like, conscribed is actually incorrect. It's not an increase in prices. That's just the effect. That's like the symptom. Inflation is an increase in the money supply. So if your steaks go up because of a shortage of beef in Argentina, or if there's, like, like, for example, this just happened in the news recently. India put an export ban on rice, and so rice prices rose in the United States. That's not inflation. That's just a shortage. That can happen with any good, and there can also be a glut. Some company can overproduce bottled water, for example, and then bottled water prices will fall everywhere. That's neither inflation or deflation. That's just supply and demand of individual goods. When we're talking about price level throughout an entire economy, the price is rising, that's a result of inflation of the money supply. And the money supply is basically the amount of units of currency or money available to be used in an economy. So in the United States, M2 money supply rose about 40% after COVID. From 2020 to 2022, M2 money supply rose 40%. A lot of that was locked up in, bank reserves. A lot of it was locked up in, financial instruments. Only some of it went to transfer payments, but because it did, we saw the highest amount of inflation we'd seen in 40 years. Shadowstat says that inflation was at 18% roughly for basically all of 2021 and 2022. It's been only abating recently, but it is essentially just when the government expands the money supply to remedy some sort of crisis. And so I'm sure you know example. I mean, you've studied this, right? So you know some examples, right? The 1970s are a perfect one. When the government starts printing money and that money gets into the economy, more dollars chasing the same goods means higher prices. It's just how math works. Is that a good explanation?
I feel like everyone, like every average Joe on the street can tell that it's more expensive to live right now than it was even just a few years ago. It's like it's getting more and more difficult to buy groceries. Like I like my last trip was over $100 and for something that would have been far less before, even in Mexico where I am right now, like where most things are cheaper, it's still expensive. It's like a global thing. It's how come people are having trouble connecting those dots of like what the actual problem is of like the money printing, diluting the currency? Like why is it so confusing? Is it to go all the way back to education and the media and sort of all these, like, do you think that this is part of the puppeteer game that the central banks are playing to just keep people confused and not know that they're the real problem?
I think that's absolutely right. I think it first stems back to education. I mean, we're not even really taught finance or economics in the true sense in college or in high school, right? You don't learn about financial system. You learn
I wasn't
about
taught any, and they were trying to teach you the wrong way. It's like either none or the exact opposite of the truth.
Or the exact opposite of the truth. Exactly. And so they have a vested interest in teaching you things that are incorrect, things that help and benefit them and their control of the system. And so they don't want you to understand actually how things work. And so because of that, most people are uninformed. And I think to the extent that prices did rise, the media came up with at least semi-valid reasons for it, right? They said, hey, there's, COVID hit, there's supply chains, there's lockdowns. Of course you're going to see food prices rise because we're having, constraints on our delivery and transportation systems because so many people are sick, right? And then after that narrative kind of died out, oh, well, now it's the Ukraine war. And the Ukraine war is what's causing all these
Putin price hikes.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
The Putin price hike. That's what's causing the inflation. And so all along the way, they've had different excuses. And so once that excuse runs out, they'll come up with another one. I'm sure they will. But my thesis is that this is not just, temporary commodity prices problems, although it is. Tavi Costa on it was a portfolio manager pointed out last week, the amount of rig counts for offshore drillers has fallen to a 5-year low, and it keeps falling. And so that's not good because that means less oil supply, higher oil prices. That's upward pressure on inflation. But more so than that, more than just commodity prices, is the debt problem, right? $32 trillion of debt getting refinanced at 5% rates. Not even to mention the corporate bond market. Something like 50% of corporate bonds are going to be refinanced between now and 2025. So 2024, 2025. And so what do we do when all these rates start to get readjusted and all these companies start defaulting? That's when the money printer has to be turned back on. And that's why I said this is one of those things that's it's inevitable, right? This is the end game of their system. Their entire system is built on debt, and debt needs a yield. And so you need more interest and more money created every year to pay the interest on that debt that existed the previous year. And so that means you have to borrow more and more and more and more. And this system doesn't end. This train doesn't stop. So that's what I was trying to kind of relay with this series, and that's why I'm also bullish on Bitcoin, same as you.
Mm-hmm. And I, for one, the whole debt topic is it's too expansive for my brain to really even comprehend because there are just so many different layers to it. For example, we've got the United States is in a shitload of debt, and the countries that the U.S. owes debt to, they're in a shitload of debt, and it's like a cobweb of everyone owing each other. So how do you make sense of that mess? Who owes who, and where is the final? Where do the books get settled? Where does this end? Once it really unravels, and what does that look like?
So a really simple way to think about this is, again, this is where it's nice to have a finance and accounting background. In accounting, the first law of accounting is something called A equals L plus E. And that means assets equals liabilities plus equity. So every balance sheet of any financial institution in the world, all of their assets will exactly equal all of their liabilities plus their equity. This is like a law of finance. Think about it like gravity, right?
Supply and demand.
Supply and demand. It just has to balance out because a company can't have, assets that it didn't either buy through liabilities or build through equity, right? There's no other place for them to get assets. Those are the two options. And so every liability that's created in the system is also an asset to somebody else. So if I buy a treasury bond, that's a liability to the treasury. They have to pay money, but now it's an asset to me. And so what they're doing is they're essentially, kind of like, a golden handcuff or a trap. It's like they're entrapping the entire world in debt, but they're calling it an asset as well on the other side of the balance sheet so that the other institution will fight against the debt defaulting because they don't want that other institution doesn't want to lose their asset, doesn't want to lose that value. And so because of this, in the last 100 years, M2 money supply has only ever gone negative once, and that was this year, basically end of last year and beginning of this year, which is when we've already seen 5 or 6 major bank failures just within a few months of this happening. And so the entire system is built on debt, and it needs continual debasement and continual credit growth to survive, which is why I've said, the Fed can raise rates to 5%. Sure, the ECB can raise rates to 5%. Let's see how long they can keep them there. Can they do it for a year? Sure, but they're digging themselves a deeper hole, because the more debt gets refinanced at that rate, the more money has to be paid to pay out that interest, and the more strain gets put on the system, more and more bankruptcies. And if the Fed wants to avoid that and avoid a global deep recession or depression, they're going to have to print. There's no other option. And so you can think about the system like in a very simple way of every single debt that's created is also an asset to somebody else who doesn't want that asset destroyed. And so therefore the debt needs to be maintained. So every day the debt level hikes up a little bit higher, hikes up a little bit higher, hikes up a little bit higher, and it doesn't want to come back down ever, because destruction of debt is the destruction of money itself.
Every single dollar that's made is like, I wish I had reviewed this video before. Have you watched Mike Maloney at all?
Yeah, I have. Yeah.
Shout out to Mike, because he is a gold bug. He is like a shitcoiner also, but his fundamental understanding of money and his YouTube series called the Hidden Secrets of Money series, that was literally what started me on this whole thing back in 2020. Yeah, that was like, I watched that in 2020, and I was balls deep in crypto blockchain at the time. I had like a crypto blog, and I was all about altcoins and trading, and watching his videos was really what got me thinking about money itself, because he just does a great job laying it out. But one of his analogies he had was every single dollar that comes into existence is like a debt. It's like the entire thing is built on debt, and the debt pile, it grows faster than the actual like dollars. So it's impossible to ever work. It's like just a matter of like, by very foundation, it's just like a can kicking game of like trying to make sure that debt keeps outrunning the actual supply of money, right? Like, did I explain that semi-correctly?
Semi-correctly. Like, basically, okay, there's two ways money is created, basically. Like, if we're going to simplify it down to the roots, whenever you borrow money from a bank, they loan money into existence to pay you, right? So when you take out a mortgage, that's not money they're not taking cash from, I don't know, Jane or John or Sam. They're literally creating a deposit for you, and they're creating an asset on their balance sheet. And so they're saying, okay, they're creating a liability for you and an asset for them, but they're doing it in the form of money. So they're putting a deposit in your bank account so that you can buy that house. And so they're loaning money into existence. So at the same time they create a unit of currency, they're creating a unit of debt. And the other way that money is created is when the Treasury borrows. So when the government borrows money or runs a deficit, they issue a bond, and that bond, again, pops out of nowhere, didn't exist 5 minutes ago. Boop. They press a few buttons, and it pops into existence. And then they sell that bond for money, and either they sell it for a bank reserve, or what's called sometimes a settlement balance, or the Fed or someone actively buys it with basically indirectly through the primary dealers. It's either draining financial system liquidity, or it's draining the Fed's liquidity, but the Fed has infinite liquidity, or it drains you and me using our cash to buy a treasury bond. But that creates money as well, because the Fed is, you can think of it the inverse. They're borrowing money into existence, and then they have cash that they can now spend into the real economy. So either way, money is created through debt, right? And the
Sounds like nothing could go wrong.
No, nothing can go wrong. The problem is debt always requires a yield. First of all, it needs to be paid off nominally, but it always has interest. And so that means that the money supply has to grow basically at around, it doesn't have to be exact, but around the rate of interest forever. So if you have 5% interest rates, that means that if there's imagine this as a super simple system. There's $100 in the town, and it's loaned into existence at 5% interest. Well, next year, it needs to be $105 needs to be paid back, but you can't, because there's only $100 in existence. So what do? You have to induce someone else to borrow so that you can create the additional $5. Yes, exactly. And so the money supply has to grow forever. That's essentially how the system is structured. It can't stop long term. Again, can we stop for 3 months? Okay. Can we stop for 6 months, a year? Fine. Let's see them try to stop it for 5 years. Let's see them try to take the Fed balance sheet back to zero. They won't.
And to anyone hearing this and thinking, wow, this sounds like an absolute shit show, it makes no sense and my head is spinning, you're not crazy, you are right. It's intentionally insane, it makes absolutely no sense, and it's really just a Rube Goldberg machine of just different things kicking cans around each other, but it's just a giant bubble, like you said earlier, it's like a Ponzi on top of a Ponzi. And the reason why, even as I'm hearing you talk about this, there's parts of that even after like years of looking into this, I just haven't even learned it. I don't even care that much because I know that we're moving off of this eventually. All I care about is going to blow up, and I am like preparing for that. But like backing up to where this whole crazy system started, it didn't used to be that way. Like, as I recommended the Hidden Secrets of Money series earlier, what that talks about is how people used to just use gold. And you can't do all these crazy things when you're just trading little yellow rocks. And like way back, I mean, the Bitcoin standard is another must read. It goes through this whole thing. That's like my most recommended thing of all time on the internet, probably. Shout out to Safety. Humans started using shells and rocks and glass beads and these really primitive things to trade, but they started running into problems because people could come from outside to, so I don't remember the exact name of the island, but the place that had glass beads, I believe, is in Africa. People came from Europe and basically could just make really cheap beads from home, and they would just come in and just buy up all their actual stuff with their like cheaply made currency, and they've got all their things, and then the people are just left with a shitload of beads that doesn't do anything. So that's like the first example of like inflation is like the currency is just going way up, but all the stuff gets lost. And so people over time, like around the world, just started realizing we need a better system here that actually follows the laws of math and nature. And gold ended up checking the most boxes because it was scarce. There's only a certain amount of it on Earth. It's really difficult to manipulate and make more of physically. Like you have to work to get it, which is like one of the things we'll talk about this later, I'm sure, but Bitcoin implements that perfectly. It's proof of work. You can't just print it out of thin air like every altcoin can. Like there's no founders that just decide what the supply is all the time. And so people started using that, and it became the reserve currency of the world for thousands of years. And literally there were thousands of years that went by, and there were basically no big financial crises like this. Like, of course, there are like different things going on. Like, you know, there's like barbaric shit that happened throughout history, but none of it was a money problem, really. And it's only in recent decades and centuries that I would say even in the last like 100 years, has been the most prominent, where all these economic crises are happening, where there's inflation and people are losing their entire life energy out of nowhere. So maybe you could like give a little bit of background there. Like, how did it's called Keynesian economics is this new one. The gold-based system was Austrian. I don't know if we can maybe go into that a little bit as well, but how did this transition happen? Like, what happened? When did the Federal Reserve come in and, you know, kick off this whole thing?
Well, so look, like a lot of these things, the way that the people implementing the new system are able to successfully convince the first movers and convince the first, people to adopt their technology is by identifying some sort of problem. And so what I always tell the gold bugs is, yes, you're completely right, but the one problem with gold that they don't account for is that it's so valuable. Like, you would need a tiny, tiny little bit to do most microtransactions, and most people aren't going to carry around a pocket with gold dust and like measure out with weights gold dust. And so in the 1500s, 1600s, Renaissance Italy, as trade started to boom, as Europe started to come out of the Dark Ages, the trade routes to Asia, to India, all reopened, and all these cities in the waters and border towns of Italy, as in like the coastal towns of Italy, all of them decided to start using gold and silver as money, right? Because they just wanted a standard that was simple to transact with. And in Medici and in Florence, they were using gold. initially. And then bankers at the time, which is actually the word for bench in Italian, who were people who were converting different coins from different kings, decided, hey, like this system's really inefficient. We have all these different coins. Why don't we safeguard your coins for us, your gold,
trust us
in our vaults, trust us, and we will issue notes. And again, like you and I could sit here and in hindsight say that this was a bad idea, but you also have to realize at the time there was a reason why people did this, is because carrying around, especially a large amount of coins, was burdensome and dangerous. And doing notes where the same note could represent different values was a lot better, because you could have a small pad of notes and everyone thinks you just have a couple hundred, florins, but in reality you have a couple thousand. And so it was a great way to discreetly carry money and to transfer money more easily. And so liquidity was the name of the game, and that's what all the bankers, sold everyone on, is you need more liquidity. We need to be using these paper notes.
And it's a legitimate problem.
Yeah,
that
it
they
is.
solved. And even on today, when you see like the graph comparing like fiat versus gold versus Bitcoin, like the one thing fiat can do is move around really fast. Because
exactly.
it has no weight to it, and that's kind of that. And they really drilled in that use cases they're implementing this, I assume.
Exactly. That's the one flaw of gold, right? If gold had all of its properties and then had the abundance characteristics of silver, we probably would have never had to really go on a fiat standard. But that was its one flaw, and the bankers exploited that. And in 1609, the Central Bank of Amsterdam was formed, and this central bank was basically trying to remedy the problem of all these different smaller banks having their own regional currencies. Because like imagine you're in medieval or semi-medieval, Europe, and every bank in every town has their own currency. So that means if you go between just a 20-mile journey will make you have to change currencies 3 times. Like that's ridiculous, right? And so in Amsterdam, which was a hub of trade and commerce, the bankers all complained and talked to the government, and the government said, okay, we're going to set up a central bank. And the central bank will issue one currency, and it'll be the bankers' bank. All the bankers can put their notes with us. It's another trust us, bro, and we will issue one currency. So there's no more conversion bullshit. And 100 years later, 1694, the Bank of England is founded, and central banking has been a core part of modern financial systems ever since, because of this argument that we need more liquidity, one, and we need a centralized place to store and transmit value rather than having a decentralized marketplace, because there is some inefficiency with a decentralized marketplace and every bank in every city having their own currency. There is it's a lot more stable. You won't have the banking crises are a lot harder to have happen, burn through an entire country, because every single bank has their own balance sheet, and some banks are really risky and some banks are really safe, and so
the systemic risks don't
the
really
systemic risk was almost none.
Permeate.
Yeah, because they didn't like loan money to each other really. They just had notes that they would send to each other and balance out their checkbooks with, and so they created this central bank as a way to solve that problem and make the system more centralized and make it more streamlined. But the problem with this is that as you increase liquidity and as you increase the size and power of the central bank, you also increase, obviously, the size of the banking system, which means with every crisis, the crisis gets worse and more money is needed to bail them out. And so that's kind of what, one of my pieces in my series is laying that out, that if you look at at history, the bailouts are exponentially growing, right? 1907 and then 1933, and then there's 2008 or 2008. Like every single bailout that they've had to do has been growing exponentially. And 2020 has only we had $4 trillion, $4.1 trillion printed for 2020, but that's still, in my opinion, not over, because I think the Fed's going to turn QE back on again. But every single bailout grows because the size of the banking system grows and the amount of liabilities and assets it has grows. And so the amount of money it needs to recapitalize itself increases. And so the end game for it is that it just has a blow off top. It melts up, right?
What does that mean in dummy terms?
They print money to monetize every liability. So think about
to inflate away the debt.
to inflate away the
debt worth less. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because they owe so much. The only way to get out of that is to make the money worthless.
Exactly. And again, like, this is not a linear. This is what I try to tell people. This is not a linear process. This is not like, oh, they monetize 10% of the debt, then inflation goes up 10%, then they monetize another 10%, then inflation goes up another 10%. No, it will rip higher and higher and higher because of feedback loops that work within the economy to push inflation higher, right? I mean, the Fed technically right now is not creating money. They haven't created money for 9 months, a year, kind of. I mean, they've been tapering, sort of. They had the BTFP, but that's mainly for the financial system. They're not really printing money right now, but yet inflation is still 3%. Why? Because inflation has momentum, and there are still feedback loops working in the economy to drive it higher. And so, yeah, like, that's, I mean, my thesis is that the blow off top, all the Austrians have said for decades that the mother of all credit collapses is coming, and they're right, but I think the Fed will stave it off by printing money, an infinite amount of dollars to monetize every liability, to bail everyone out again.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Austrians will have like the ultimate "I told you so" ever. I don't know if do you know Harry Dent? Does that ring a bell?
Yeah, I know Harry Dent. Yeah.
I was just watching one of his recent videos. He has his like Harry's rants every week or whatever, and this poor guy has just been like, long before I even knew any of this stuff, he was just saying like, it's gonna go badly, it's gonna go badly, it's gonna go badly, and his only mistake is just underestimating how long this can be drawn out, which is like same thing for all the gold bugs and the Bitcoiners and the Austrians, who know that there's no way this is ever going to go well because it's math, but it's just like such a long grind of putting up with these endless games that can be played. Since it's so centralized, the centralized behemoth can make its own rules and just find ways to cheat its way out every single time, but it's eventually going to hit a brick wall and go off a cliff, and there's going to be total chaos because this seems like the only way this is going to happen. And this is the main reason why myself and you and so many people are really digging deep into this, because it's extremely consequential for our future and future generations, because the bubble has gotten so big, it just continues to get bigger and bigger the longer that this is drawn out, and it's going to be a very, we'll say, hectic transition period when the wrong thing farts and the whole thing just implodes. And I would say like this is a big reason why Bitcoin has been a huge pillar of hope for a lot of people. Like, I'm sure you've listened to Jeff Booth quite a bit. He's one of my favorite guys to listen to, talking about what will this transition look like, and is there hope that we can make it a peaceful, smooth transition into like a more mathematical, sound system that's not based on nonsense? And this is just something that we're all on the front lines of learning about and digging ourselves and trying to figure out how can we help the most people, make sure they don't get wrecked by the system that they were just born into and have no fault in. Like, the majority of the world is just trying to feed their family and live life and be happy. And there's just this ugly swamp of politicians that goes back so many decades that has just been prolonging and worsening this problem. And it's just figuring out what we're going to do. So I'm curious, with all that said, you are a Bitcoiner as well, and why do you think that Bitcoin is the solution to this? What does it fix about this? Because so many people are starting to hear Bitcoin more often used in this context of it's an actual, real, serious solution to the problem, and it's constantly had to battle with all this noise around all these other things that are happening around it. And I'm a huge skeptic of every single altcoin that's trying to even put itself in the same category. And maybe we can talk more about that later. But I think that Bitcoin solves the most important problem, which is this Keynesian mess we've been talking about. Give me your case for why a sound money currency, basically the analogy I still like is digital gold. I know some people don't like that because it doesn't get the whole picture. There's so many more ways to look at it, but I like it as digital gold because It's taking all those good things about gold. It's scarce in supply, which is like the number one thing. It's perfectly divisible. It's fungible. It follows math. It follows the rules of nature. It takes work to produce. You can't print it. No one's in control. It's decentralized. And how would you make the case for that being the solution to this problem?
Well, this is an interesting, topic of discussion, because I think there's a lot of ways to approach this problem, right? For one, the best types of money have very limited supply, right? It's much harder to make additional units of currency because you want to limit what are called Cantillon effects, which I'm sure you're aware of. But Cantillon effects are where somebody who's able to manipulate the money supply or stand close to the person manipulating the money supply is able to profit unfairly, right? Because when new units of currency are created, the economy doesn't have information about that immediately. It takes time for this money and for the new units of currency to flow through the economy to start impacting prices. And so the first people to get their hands on the freshly printed dollars or freshly printed yen or whatever it is are the ones able to profit the most because they can spend it before the inflation really hits. They're effectively stealing purchasing power from you and me. And so having a hard cap and a hard supply basically limits or even extinguishes the ability of people to do that. And the second thing I think it solves, and I've mainly touched upon this in my work, is Triffin's dilemma, right? We've talked about gold as a global reserve currency, which it was for thousands of years, and starting in, I would say, 1700s, the pound. Before that, it was actually, I think it was Portuguese peso was their global reserve currency, and then the Spanish peso, and then the pound. And that was 200 years, one of the longest reserve currencies ever. And then we had the US dollar. And the issue with any reserve currency issuing or trying to run a global monetary system is that the global monetary system in the end, they have a huge demand for the currency. They need dollars, right? China and Russia, even though they want to move off the dollar system, if they want to trade, 80% trade is done in dollars, they need dollars. And so all these countries demand dollars, and we have to supply them if we don't want global trade to start grinding to a halt and to see currency crises pop up everywhere. And so we have to be constantly exporting dollars, which means we're constantly importing goods, which means we move jobs away from the U.S., we destroy the middle class, we gut out the Midwest and the Rust Belt, like really bad things for America. And we export all these cheap jobs to other countries so that they can make goods and we buy them with printed dollars. So it's a bad deal for them too, because we're just printing dollars to buy their real goods and their commodities. And Triffin's dilemma only works when there's a centralized currency. And so when you have something like Bitcoin, which is decentrally issued, meaning there's not a single node that creates the currency, Triffin's dilemma does not apply. Because again, it's like having gold be the reserve currency. There's no central node of gold. And so because there's no central issuer, there's no dilemma that arises. There's no problem of saying, hey, should we stop printing dollars and the global economy stops running? Or should we keep printing dollars and devalue our currency to the point that we'll no longer be reserve currency, which is essentially Triffin's dilemma. Because, this has been the final nail in the coffin of every reserve currency for the last 500, 600 years, because all of them have been
constantly
fiat
changing.
currencies.
It's not like it feels like we've been $1 forever, but it's just a blip in the history of money just being kicked around.
And look, I wanted to say this earlier, Ben. Like, people in our modern day and age, especially, people are insanely impatient. They think that this whole thing will blow up in a year, right? Oh, the entire dollar-based system will be destroyed in the next year. No, it does not work that fast. The Roman Empire hit its peak 200 years before, 200 or 300 years before it ultimately, at least the Western Roman Empire, collapsed. So these things have momentum. These things take time. Great Britain, basically got beaten in World War I, or not beaten, but they got badly bruised, I should say. And their currency had severe inflation. They tried to repeg it. They were losing reserve currency status. It still took until 1944 for the loss of reserve currency status to be cemented. So that's 24 years, right? These things take time. This isn't an overnight process. This isn't an overnight thing. Although, like I said, it will happen much it's gradually, then suddenly. It slowly builds up, and then within a couple years is when all the major events happen, and it seems like it just occurs out of nowhere. Most people will be taken unawares. But
and the
Bitcoin,
new variable that's coming in is that graph with all the lines just getting straighter and straighter up of like the technology adoption. Like it used to take a really long time, when the printing press first came out, it took a really long time for that to really permeate throughout society. And a television set and a radio, it took a little while, but a little bit faster. And now, like, a new phone comes out and it's like, everyone has a new iPhone. It's just like immediately. It's so quick that these things take hold. Like, that's the new sort of like ingredient in the big witch's brew of like money, is that we suddenly have this money that is like part of like is technology that's making it. So it's going to kind of take a page out of that book of like it's going to be a lot faster than it used to be, but it's still not going to be immediate. But it's not going to follow the old rules of taking many decades, I would say. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. It's these things speed up, and that's what I'm saying. Like, what we're talking about before is Bitcoin being money, right? Bitcoin having a hard supply cap, Bitcoin having the properties of money, divisibility, fungibility, right? Durability. It's almost perfectly durable. If you remember your seed phrase, you can basically take it anywhere in the world. It is one of those things that is like almost like a too perfect solution. It's like the immaculate conception. It's like it hits every single major like necessity that a great money should have, or perfect money should have. And the only like downside that I got fudded out of was the transaction speed, right? There's only roughly 5 to 7 transactions you can do a second because of the block size limits. And so I thought in 2018, when I first started researching Bitcoin, I thought, wow, this can't be global money, because obviously you need orders of magnitude more transactions. So this can never be real money. It's a thing to play poker with, and it's a thing to play games with, but it's not to be taken seriously, until I realized that actually our monetary system is also layered, and the deepest layer, which is Fedwire, which is giant bank transfers of money, they have the same transaction speed that Bitcoin has, basically.
It's slower, right? Isn't it even
actually
worse?
Yeah, it's actually slower. It's worse. Yeah. And so Bitcoin doesn't need to settle all global transactions. It just needs to settle the big ones. And so we can use Lightning or other even like layer 3 options to settle microtransactions, which, by the way, are 99% of transactions anyways. Most transactions happen under $1,000. And so with the introduction of Lightning, I think that really supercharges Bitcoin into the place of the next perfect money. And especially what I've been saying too is kind of the thesis of my book is it's the next reserve currency, right? It's the next option for countries to start accumulating as a pristine, what is called pristine collateral that cannot be destroyed or cannot be compared to another asset, right? Because it's so good. And treasuries were pristine collateral for the last 50 years, because treasuries, the U.S. government was had the largest tax base in the world with the most productive economy. We paid back our currency in real terms, especially for these other countries, and so buying treasuries was the best move they could do. But that's no longer the case. And so I think these countries are starting to wake up slowly and realize that the game is changing. Treasuries are no longer a store of value. The U.S. dollar as a reserve, or use treasuries as a reserve asset, are no longer a good option, and they need to come up with something else. And currently, they're still aiming towards gold. 2022 is the highest amount of gold buying ever in any year. But I think gold is anachronistic. I think it has flaws, and I think that Bitcoin's a much better reserve asset. And I think that once these countries start to realize it, things will really start to pop off. Because, like, imagine, and again, I said this to Marty Bent, imagine if multiple countries on the nation-state level start to buy it as their reserve asset and put it on their balance sheet. Imagine what happens to the price of Bitcoin.
And they have magical money printers.
Yeah.
So, like, if the Fed starts getting bullish on Bitcoin, that's the end of, like, the cheap sats, essentially.
Exactly.
And that's why I care so much about getting people to understand this.
Yeah.
Like, this is the game right now. This is the biggest game there is.
Exactly. And again, I don't really want central banks to own a shit ton of Bitcoin anyways. I really don't want
Nobody
that.
does.
But
Like,
even if they did, the perfect thing about Bitcoin is share of the network ownership does not equate to actual voting power, which is a completely new, theory. Because most of our prior systems are like Ethereum, for example. The more Ethereum you own, the more you could stake, the more votes you have in the network, right? Or any DAO, the more of the DAO tokens you own.
that sounds like fiat currency, dude.
It does. The more,
Sounds a lot like fiat.
yeah, the more DAO tokens you own, the more voting rights you have. And Bitcoin is the first. Bitcoin and gold are two examples of the first monies to break free from that. If you have a ton of gold, you can't affect my supply or my ownership of my gold. So same with Bitcoin.
We had to get here eventually. I feel like we need to talk about Bitcoin versus crypto, and this is something that we've taken very different angles on in social media, which has been very enjoyable to watch.
You've gotten toxic. You've gotten toxic.
100%. And this is one of the first things we talked about when we had dinner or the first time we met, which was I am taking the Saifedean route of just fire hose to the face. You're like, this is a scam. Like, it's bullshit. And you're taking the more like leaving the breadcrumbs, like teaching people about fiat and Keynes and central banks. And you're being a little bit more like agnostic when things get hairy in like conversation. So I'm very curious. Well, I know what you think. To anyone that doesn't, I would love to hear just your take on like where do altcoins in the crypto space compare to Bitcoin? Like, where do you see that as part of the big picture? We'll stick with Ethereum because that's like literally the biggest one. This by far the second place is a huge dip after that. Where do you see that?
I think that all these tokens pass the Howey test for being a security.
Easy.
And so I'm not saying that they have absolutely no value. I think that they could have value, or maybe even they do. But I don't think that they are money in the way that a true monetary scholar would look at it, right? Just in the same way that I wouldn't say that, if we're using the technical Austrian definitions, the U.S. dollar is not money, it's currency, and Bitcoin and gold are money. Like, in the same way, these tokens are not really, true money. What they are is more of like a quasi-security that's traded on a ledger, and they're able to be exchanged sometimes for value. But you could do, they're all small insular economies. None of them have the network adoption that they really need in order to gain, adoption and gain widespread use. And this is the problem I have with crypto in general, right? Financial markets are supposed to be an abstraction of the real world. So when you think about like futures contracts or forwards or options or even equities are an abstraction of a company. They're like the kind of ephemeral, like, non-concrete view of ownership of a real company that you can see and touch with your hands, right? And so the way that financial markets should work is from the bottom up, start with the real and build up to the abstractions. So, you start with, okay, we have a marketplace, we're buying and selling corn. Okay, well then there's a company that stores corn in the marketplace. Okay, well, they want to sell parts of their business to other people. Okay, then they'll write up on a piece of paper equity in the corn, storage unit, whatever. That's how, financial markets have grown and developed over the course of thousands of years of human evolution, right? The problem with these crypto tokens is they're all speed running the evolution of their own quote unquote financial system, and they're getting to the abstractions and they're getting to complex derivatives way before they lay out an initial use case. Like AVAX or Solana, they're good tokens. They have intelligent ways to layer transactions, to do things faster than other tokens can. But the founders and the creators of it didn't even focus on making it a use case in the real world. They're immediately like, hey, how can we create swaps on AVAX? How can we, I want to create liquid AVAX. I want to stake my AVAX and collect Ethereum for it. I want to create a derivative. Why don't we create staked ETH so we can create a derivative of ETH and trade it? Why don't we create betting markets? It's like, whoa, guys, slow down. The entire point of me gambling and playing with stocks, for example, me buying Apple stock, is that one day I can sell it and buy something real. Or I can give it to my kid who can buy something real. Like the entire point of an Apple stock is so that I can sell it, I can maybe buy my house with it, or I can buy a sandwich, or I can buy some food. Or
build your savings.
Build my savings, take a trip to Italy. Whatever it is, I can do something in the real world. Because ultimately, who cares about how much abstractions you own on your balance sheet?
Just numbers.
They're just numbers. What matters is how much you can do in the real world. And so all of these tokens, the problem and the mistake, the key flaw, the fundamental flaw that they've made is not focusing on first of all being money, but number two, on actual use, real world use case and adoption. And I think that's where Bitcoin is doing a much better job, because they're focusing on how can we buy and sell, real goods. How can we buy and sell coffee? How can we buy and sell T-shirts? How can we buy and sell books using Bitcoin?
To facilitate trade in a fairer, easier way, in a money that follows the laws of math and physics and will grow over time based on like raw supply and demand, because the supply is fixed for the first time ever.
Exactly. So
that's like the realest problem there is. Like it's the perfect use case solved. And since it solved the biggest problem right out of the gate, as soon as it was launched, like every single altcoin is just the founder. They need to come up with some story for like how it's better than Bitcoin in some way, and they pretty much all go to like, oh, it's faster. Like, you can do 1 million bazillion transactions per second, and okay, like I don't really care about that. Like I swipe my credit card to buy groceries and it was like instant. Like I don't need faster money. It's fine. And like in Bitcoin Lightning could do much faster as well. So that use case is pretty bogus. And then, like, what about NFTs? Oh, like you can trade JPEGs or pictures, and we can maybe talk about GameStop more in specific, because this is kind of where we've gotten in as well, is the use case that the GameStop C-suite and Ryan Cohen have sort of brought in with the GameStop NFT marketplace is the idea of gaming on like a blockchain, like blockchain games, like being able to move around the ownership of games. My argument to that is like, why not just use a regular database? Because like, why would you just make it really slow and clunky? Because it's not even decentralized. Because these altcoins have a CEO, for gosh sakes. It's still just like their ledger. It's they control it. They can turn it off if the SEC knocks on their door. It's gone, just like a regular centralized database. So why would you make all of these major trade-offs of making it really slow and inefficient if it doesn't have any upside versus a regular efficient database? So that's kind of like a brain vomit of things that I've been tweeting about the last couple of years. But if we may, I would love to just kind of angle into this GameStop side, because I'm sure a lot of people listening will be curious sort of where you stand on that. And I know that face means you're excited about this one.
Yeah, you're trying to get me in hot water, man.
Well,
no.
I have dug in my heels so deep on this. Everyone knows what I think, who's followed both of us on Twitter. I think that Ryan Cohen is like taking a bad route with the NFTs and the altcoins and the crypto Web3 blockchain, whatever. I think that all of that is going to just not work. I don't think any of it is going to work. I think that he has been deluded by the same scams that so many other really highly operating like fiat career people have. Like,
well, why do you think he has? He's brilliant. He has a great team of people. Why do you think he is more likely to be scammed than? He would be least likely, right? So why has he gone down this path?
I think that since he's had such a great career, like working in the TradFi realm, he's in the mindset of move fast, break things, like be the inventor of new things. And this is the same reason why Elon is like so all about Doge, and who knows, maybe we'll make some new shitcoin for the X thing. Like these founders and like entrepreneurial people, they have more of a mindset of like, how can I fix the problem? I want to be the fixer. I want to like get the new thing. Like I don't want this boring thing that's already entrenched. I want to make the new thing that fixes everything. And they haven't gone through the rabbit hole of learning about money. Like I don't think Ryan Cohen knows about like the history of Austrian versus Keynesian gold, the fiat currencies. I think that he's so busy being a super badass manager of people and creating really great companies in the past. Like he did a great job with Chewy because he was really great at operating e-commerce. He's like an e-commerce god, and he's great at managing people and putting teams together. I think that this is the one instance in his career where I haven't studied his career super deeply, but I just simply think it's a mistake to be picking altcoin CEOs and saying, you're going to be the one that makes this like crypto thing work and fiat is going to work this time. Like, because it's just a fiat coin. All like the IMX, Loopring, Telos, they did like a partnership with FTX that blew up, of course. Like, I mean, I just don't think he knows what he's doing in this realm. And like, I am always spamming him on Twitter with all these resources.
You're
I have
toxic.
no idea. I have no idea if he'll ever see them, but I do it because I know he has it in him. He has the Austrian tendencies, and some people have like poked at me and be like, "You think Ryan Cohen is just a scammer? Like, do you think he's just scamming people? Like, the Bitcoin people just think he's a scammer at this point because GameStop has an NFT marketplace. Like, he's a leader of GameStop, and that's something that they're doing. So, like, the Bitcoin friends just think it's a full-on scam at this point. And that's one point that I'm, like, really trying to buckle down on and get him through that because I think that his head is on right. I think he really wants to make the world a better place. And so I think he's just tripping up on this one, and that's what I'm trying to push through. And I'm willing to stake my whole reputation on episode 1, baby. Like, it's Bitcoin or nothing. I don't think the altcoins are a good idea. I think that there's tons of cool things that GameStop could do with Bitcoin, and I've listed them all before. Just today, dude, I saw a video of Mary Emasua, and I'm not sure if you know her. She's like this Filipino-Nigerian girl who does like gaming streams. And she did her first Nostr gaming stream with Zaps. And she was getting Bitcoin tips on her game stream. Like, I didn't even know you could do that on Nostr. But Nostr is a whole another rabbit hole. It's like a decentralized social media protocol for anyone who doesn't know what that is. But like, I originally was kind of thinking like GameStop should go in this direction of just making like a Twitch competitor, like a regular centralized streaming competitor, because a lot of people have problems with.
They are developing that. They are developing
a centralized one,
Twitch.
Or is it like a?
Well, I don't know
crypto?
about centralized, decentralized, but I know that they're doing it. They're creating what's called Player, PLAYR.
It's on a shitcoin. It's like a shitcoin thing. It's on like Elixir and Telos, which are total shitcoins. It's like
okay.
all the things they're coming out with are like based on these like fake decentralized things that are just CEOs running scams, in my opinion. And I think that my original like hill that I was standing on was like I think GameStop should just do it the centralized way and just make a new product. And like I think a lot of people would leave Steam and Twitch for that, but I'm kind of changed my mind with Nostr now. I think that it's really going to create some brand new solutions. I think that Twitter is going, or X or whatever the fuck, is going to eventually have to just become a client on Nostr. And I'm not technical enough to like really say where GameStop would fit into that mix. It's a crazy like mess of ideas right now. I'm kind of just like vomiting like thoughts because I'm brand new to Nostr as well. But I just don't think crypto altcoins are the way.
Well, I would, again, I'd push back a little bit. So I think, again, like understanding that they are a security, which is genuinely what I believe. I think it's fine for people to buy and sell NFTs, just like it's fine for, I wouldn't have a problem with someone buying and selling trading cards. Because even though you have a trading card, you have a rare Babe Ruth, 1951, whatever, trading card, that if the company wanted to today, they could just print more of them. There's no legal agreement that says you can never create more of these. Or if there is, they could probably try to find some way to break it, right? And so I don't have a problem with people buying NFTs. I don't have a problem with people buying digital collectibles. I don't have a problem with people buying digital skins. It's similar to like what people would do for, World of Warcraft. Like, you could use real world money to buy skins and buy things in the game and even trade them, like, in real time with other people. And same with League of Legends. Like, you can spend real money on buying League of Legends skins. And I don't think you can trade them, but, like, if you could, I wouldn't have a problem with there being a secondary market. And so I don't have an issue with NFTs per se. I think that NFTs are actually a good idea. I think that it's smart that he put that on the platform, in the sense that it's good to have a trading card. But I think that there needs to be a ton of disclaimers, because the issue with NFTs is if the community if someone creates an NFT and sells it to the community and people like it and just says, hey, this is a cool new skin, this will make your character look great, and if you want to pay $30 for it because I spent some time to make it and code it up, go for it. Great, that's fine. The problem is there's a ton of NFTs that are promising future rewards, right? They're promising, hey, you buy that this NFT, you flip it, you'll 10x your money. Hey, you buy that,
you can yield 1,000,000%.
You can yield, it'll yield 8% for forever, right? Those kinds of promises are what constitute, a securities law violation, like literally, because you're promising future yield for current work, and that is something that should be prevented, because that's not fair. You can't be selling illegal unregistered securities on a marketplace that's meant to be just for gaming and skins. And so that's what I would say. It's like, you need to thread the needle. It's if Ryan wants to put up, have all these companies put up new cool gaming skins, and if you want to buy them, you can. If not, this is just a collectible. Okay. And, there's no guarantee that we won't make more of these in the future. Okay, fine. But if they're going to be promising people that you can this is like an investment scheme, that's where it starts to get really dicey for me. And I think
Which
that
all
would be
of them are,
horrible.
by the way. Like, every single one that's involved is, like, making false promises.
Well, again, I haven't researched any of them individually, so I can't say that. But is that true? Have they promised money? Have they promised that they would pay money?
I'd have to go back. I made a big thread on it that I'm adding to every day. But, like, what's an example? The Robbie Ferguson, the Immutable X guy, like, they made a huge celebratory, like, oh, we're switching to proof of stake, you can get all this yield. And I'm like, dude, it's crazy. Like, I would have to go back and look at them all, but they're all part of the false promises that are, like, literally scams. Like, the promises they're making cannot be fulfilled or sustained, because it's just like a yield Ponzi. Mm-hmm. And like you said, I have no problem with people putting their money wherever they want, but there is, like, a moral dilemma there, because if they're buying something that they don't really know what it is, and I have a problem with that. And this is in the realm that should be regulated, in my opinion. Like, I think that there should be rules based on scams within that crypto fiat stock market system. And anyone that says there shouldn't, then you better not be mad about Ken Griffin's stealing money from everybody, because, there would be scams absolutely everywhere. Like, if you've ever said that, like, Ken Griffin should go to jail, then you can't talk about this like it's a good thing that there's this new type of scam. Like, I just think that it's bad that there's scams, period.
Yeah. I think, look, like I said, I think if they're marketing it as a collectible, I think that's fine. If they tell people all the disclaimers, like, hey, this is just a digital collectible, we're not guaranteeing that we won't make something that looks similar to this in the future. You can buy like a skin on World of Warcraft. If you want to buy it, you can. But if they're promising people, especially for future returns, like financial results, that's where, for me, it gets dicey. And that's where I would completely agree with you. Like, if Ryan Cohen's allowing those kinds of things to proliferate on his platform, that is not within the lines or values or virtues that we should be trying to espouse. Because as we build the next system, we want to get rid of all the negative things of the prior system. And no system will ever be perfect, because we're humans, and there are people who are liars and cheats and scammers, no matter where you go. Like, even back in the gold reserve currency and, limited fiat money times, where banks just issued a small amount of fixed paper notes for every ounce of gold, there were scams then. There were snake oil salesmen in the 1800s, right? There's always going to be scammers. You can't prevent that. But what you can do is say, here are the rules that prevent these scammers from proliferating and from getting an unsized influence on our market. And so, yeah, I would agree with you on if with that stipulation. For
and
sure.
I think it's totally fair to say that everyone has a different level of like how much they care about like their thing being understood well and not having a bunch of scams like fly around and obfuscate it. Like as we were talking, we briefly talked about SLV earlier. Like when GME was taking off in in January 21, and SLV was pumping like, oh, it's the new GameStop, and then Doge was pumping, it's the new GameStop, and AMC, it's a new GameStop, and that's still going. Like that still has people stuck in it. Like to me, there was like a huge moral calling to like defend the thing and like make sure that people weren't falling for those things on the periphery that were trying to like latch onto that and coattail ride. And to me, like Bitcoin is another big one for me. And the fact alone that all the altcoins are like trying to be part of this crypto market and just say that Bitcoin is another crypto coin, like that is like, that's going to trigger every Bitcoiner. Like, no, they're not the same. They're very different. Like, if you just leave us alone and just call us, start your own market over here, but don't say that you're in this same thing with us, because they're very different categories. And like sometimes that like gets me going and maybe a little too much. I'm a little bit too aggressive toward people, but it's the same thing as why I fight the AMC people. I fight the altcoin people, because I think that these two things are like the winners in their category, and they deserve to be defended because they are special and they are not like the others. And that's kind of the stance I take on it. And so, and you're like a little bit nicer to the NFTs and the other things. Like for me, I'm just taking a hard stand there. Like I'm going full toxic.
Like I said, I think they're like trading cards, but I think that there's no, I don't think you should buy them with any guarantee that they're gonna, like they'll never be something similar or they'll make more of them, right? And whatever project you invest in, it's buyer beware, because again, a lot of these communities are tiny because there's so many cryptocurrencies. So I would just urge anyone buying an NFT to just be cautious and to just view it as buying a collectible trading card that could potentially be, someone could make a copy of it in the future or something very similar to it in the future.
I already copied all of them. I have a folder of all my copy and pastes.
Oh God, Ben is contributed to the problem.
I'm making millions on it, bro.
Yeah, I'm sure you are. How did you get into Bitcoin? Like, what was your story? Because I know you've become like a very ardent Bitcoiner, and you've become a very aggressive person in the space, but you've also become very well connected. Surprisingly, I mean, when we met up in Miami, I was surprised by how many people you knew in person. And so, yeah, what's your journey? What's your backstory? How did you get into it? And how did you get to the place you are now?
So there's definitely backstory to why I am so pro Bitcoin and anti altcoin, and it's because I started as a complete altcoiner, and I started in 2017. My fraternity roommate like brought it up in some conversation, and we were just having beers talking about it. That's like how so many of these things start. And so I bought. I immediately skipped Bitcoin, of course, because it's like the boring one. It's slow. It's bad for the environment. I skipped that one. I want to get one of the big new ones, right? As we've heard a million times. So I bought Ethereum. I bought XRP. I bought some Tron. I bought some Litecoin. A few other total shit coins that I thought sounded cool. And I just read their marketing pitches on the website, and they had very slick looking websites, so it seems like it looks good and it's legit. So I just had a whole wallet full of shit coins. And that was 2017. In 2018, that's when I started traveling. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to buy a little bit of Bitcoin just in case, so I have some of that one.
Why did you start traveling? What was the...
that's a whole nother story. I was like,
we'll get into that.
I graduated from the University of Washington in 2017.
Okay.
I worked for about a year, and I just very quickly figured out I don't want to work anymore. I want to go explore and like go see the world. So I figured out a way to basically go 2 years and just not pay, and that's a whole other story of being very nifty with a camera and making good friends and becoming hostile homies. But anyway, so that whole time I was holding a little bit of Bitcoin, but mostly just trading it because I was still in the trading mindset. I had all the shit coins, trading those too, and I got lucky, dude. Like over the course of the time I was living in Australia, I made enough from just like trading and like basically selling highs of Bitcoin. It covered my whole trip. So like,
really,
I was a rare trading success story. I don't know how I did it. It also, dude, I was straight up doing like sports gambling from my hostel in Australia. There was like a little sports betting booth, and so I was watching a lot of NFL games, playing fantasy. So I was just straight up gambling on like different like game outcomes, and I won more than I lost. And I made enough to survive.
God! Oh my god!
But that was all just stupid luck. Like, and when was it? Probably 2019 or so. I was, each year I was just a little bit more understanding. Like, okay, like I need a little bit more like Bitcoin here. Bitcoin's a little more serious than these other ones. So I'm slowly becoming like more maximalist, 1% at a time. And by 2020, at this point, I had a crypto blog. I was like blogging about different crypto coins and altcoins, and which one's gonna. I still was like totally bullish on crypto for that whole period of 2017, 18, 19, 20, for all the reasons we hear, that they're faster, they have all these utilities and these use cases, and they have such a great team. And so I was all over it. I've posted that blog on Twitter a bunch of times. I keep it up because it's interesting to look back on like how wrong I was. And bringing it back to what I talked about earlier in 2020, pretty classic story of having a lot more free time during the lockdowns. I was in New Zealand at that time. I was in this small town called Petone.
Were you working?
What's
Were
that?
you working? Were you working?
The only money I was making was on the little shitcoin blog I was running.
Okay.
It was like the crypto blog, and I did a couple little gigs with photography, but that was about it. Like I said, I was really clever at finding ways to sneak into places. So I was actually staying at this Airbnb in this small little beach town in New Zealand called Petone. I found a guy who was trying to do a big yard project, and so I basically talked my way into like, dude, I'll help you and be your like helper for this yard. Like I'll just completely dig up all this yard work, make it beautiful. We'll do all the gardening. I'll take pictures of your Airbnb for your website, and essentially talk my way into getting like a free deal. I stayed there for several months and didn't pay. And
wow.
I did similar things all throughout Australia too, but there's so many ways to get by in this world, guys. Like, just have good marketable skills.
It sounds like be creative.
Have marketable skills, be creative, and like I figured that out very early. So yeah, I was staying in this little like tiny house on the edge of this guy's bigger house, basically just like doing my little crypto blog every day, reading books, and sure enough, I stumbled across Mike Maloney's YouTube channel. It's talking about like the history of money. And at this point, I'm starting to think about money more because I'm like in crypto, and it's like money sounds like something I should probably know because I'm dealing with money. And so I watched this series, and that started getting me really think about like what is money at the most fundamental level. And he's a big gold guy, so he is talking about how fiat is terrible and gold fixes it, and to this day he's a gold bug, which I disagree with him on. But I had enough of a Bitcoin understanding to really connect, like, okay, like this is why we need sound money. I disagree with him on the solution, but now I have a much better idea of the problem.
Yeah.
And I started realizing, oh shit, like all these crypto coins I'm talking about, they're just copying fiat. They're copying the problem. Bitcoin is like the new version of gold, which I disagree with Mike on. I think that it fixes all those problems with gold you talked about, where it's like too heavy. It's not compatible with the digital age. And so that was where I really started taking a turn, like, okay, I think that Bitcoin really is the real deal, and I should start focusing on that. And it's a slow, gradual process because the crypto hooks, they're deep inside. Like when you're like in these emotional like marketing pitches of these crypto CEOs, they do a great job convincing you that they're going to fix the world, they're doing great things. Like I was really, really passionate about a lot of them. Like one of the ones was BAT, Basic Attention Token. And the idea is like, oh, this is going to be like how people tip each other online. It's like going to be the what really is value for value now. They were basically copying the value for value that Bitcoin is doing and just made a shitcoin with it. And so I was totally involved with that one. You know, I was like in chatting with the CEO or at least the developers online. Like we were all following each other. I felt like a hot shit because I was like talking with these developers. But that all started changing after I started learning about Bitcoin deeper, and I was like, okay, like I need to start making a move here. And then guess what happens?
What?
GameStop happens.
Yeah.
2021 happens right as I'm like kind of turning the corner, becoming Bitcoin maximalist. GameStop happens. 6 months or so later, can't remember exactly when it was. They announced NFT marketplace. So in my brain, I'm like, oh fuck. I think I know what's about to happen. I think that all of these people who are in the GameStop story, they come from TradFi. They come from the TradFi world. They're all like stock folks from Wall Street Bets. Like Wall Street Bets used to not even allow crypto talk. It was all stocks. It was 100% stocks. And so all these people coming into GME are from the TradFi realm. They're going to be starting at square one on this like crypto lesson I just spent like 4 years of my life learning. And so they're going to be they're going to go straight into the same scams that I did and the same misconceptions, like skipping the fundamentals of learning about money first. So I felt like, okay, damn, like this could get weird. And I'm kind of a black sheep here because I've been through this whole thing already and none of these people have yet. So, and that's when evil Laserite Ben started coming out because I started like, you know, kind of testing the waters a little bit. I posted a poll like, which do you think is more decentralized, Ethereum or Bitcoin? And like 80% of my followers picked Ethereum, and I'm like, oh no. And like,
that's when Ben became toxic.
I started just realizing like, oh man, I'm gonna have to like go to war with my own followers right now because at that point, at the end of 21, I had like 10K followers just from GME alone, and all of them immediately, as soon as Ryan Cohen started going into NFTs, they became like Ethereum bulls and Loopring and IMX and all these coins. They were all about it, and they also picked up the rhetoric that the altcoin CEOs spread that Bitcoin is bad, it's slow, it's bad for the environment, whatever, because they need to sell their shitcoin, so they tell you Bitcoin's bad. So I that's when I started taking a stand. I'm like, I got to be the Bitcoin guy here. I'm going to dig the heels in. And a part I kind of skipped over a little bit was, so the NFT marketplace was announced, I think like the middle of 21 perhaps. And so that next 6 months, I was balls deep in like reading all of these Bitcoiner work that I had originally brushed off because I thought it was just toxic me maxis as a shitcoiner. So I read the Bitcoin Standard. I started looking deep into Jimmy Song's work. He's done an excellent job. He's super toxic. I love that guy. Lynn Alden, and you know, I basically went through the list of Bitcoiners that I had avoided before, perhaps even blocked, because I thought they were just mean to my coin. And I started listening to them because I was like, all right, like GME is starting to merge with this crypto thing. I need to figure out what's real and what isn't here, because I've been through several years of this, and I like this voice is going to be needed. So I essentially 100% locked into learning what the truth is. I came out of that realizing it's really just Bitcoin. Like these toxic motherfuckers were right the whole time. I just didn't see it because I was in crypto land. And so that's the stand I took, and I've been there last almost 3 years now. I'm happy to be the most toxic Bitcoiner in GME land. I'm happy. I feel great. People can keep throwing whatever they want at me because I've been that guy. I was the guy that was like, I hated the Bitcoiners because I was in crypto. It's such a mind virus. It's crazy. It's like it really sucks you in and makes you just like not want to like hear these people out. And a lot of it makes sense. Like the claims that the altcoin crypto industry sort of sprinkle in, they all are very emotionally based and they trigger your emotions. I'm an emotional guy, so when they tell me that Bitcoin is like bad for all these reasons, I bought it. And, I just fell for that story because I'm not highly technical. I didn't really have a great bullshit radar early on. And I think that's the same thing that's happening now. And so that's what I'm trying to fight. We'll see what happens. That's my stake that I'm claiming.
Yeah, and you've claimed it. You've claimed it for sure. You've maxed up the toxicity and yelled at people, and I've seen you get into huge fights. Yeah, it's been pretty interesting to watch. Like
entertaining for you, probably. You kind of, because you're a little more on the sidelines for that one. And
yeah, well, again, I say as long as you view all these things as a security and you're willing to take the risk, I don't have a problem with you trading this, right? Just like I don't have a problem with you buying trading cards. I just think people need to know, at least from my view, people need to know that there's a difference between money and a security, right? And Bitcoin is money and the other ones are securities. And that's fine, but if you just need to be aware of the risks. And so I don't have a problem with the NFT marketplace in that regard. I do have a problem if they are promoting active scams, which, like you said, it's so sad because the crypto space, I think, should be the forebear and should be the exemplar of a better system, and yet it is ridden with scams, right? It's mostly scams. Most of these tokens were shit, and so it's really sad to see. And one of the only use cases, I think, or one of the best use cases, I think, that came out of all this was stable coins, right? And the ability to transfer fiat money to a blockchain, hold it there, and then use it to buy other things, and to transfer money, digitally faster than you can through a bank, which is definitely an improvement because the banking system is horrific. It doesn't really make any sense, right? If you think about it, they have a centralized ledger, and yet it takes them 3 days to transfer money. And the Fed master account has all the balances of every single commercial bank, and yet a wire transfer can take 3 to 5 days, sometimes a week, right? Like, it does not, that makes zero sense to me. So whatever happens, our system needs change, but I'm hopeful that we can be part of that change. And I think you and I hopefully can play some small part in helping to encourage and build the next system. So yeah, I mean, I want to kind of wrap up. What's next for you, and I can also talk about what's next for me. What's going to happen? I mean, you're launching, right? Your YouTube channel, this podcast. Is there anything else you're doing?
Dude, I mean, getting this podcast going is definitely something I've been sitting on for a while, so I'm really excited. I'm stoked that you got to be number one.
Yeah, it's
going to be a fun new adventure. And we also got a real life adventure coming up as well. Do you want to mention what that is?
Yeah, sure. Well, you and I are moving to Colombia, to Medellin. So we'll be exploring South America and trying to make it on our own, just living life. I'm quitting my job. My last day is in 1 week on August 4th. So, it's a huge change. It's scary because I've grown accustomed to working at a tech company and having all this, having all this support and all these great benefits. The pay isn't amazing, but the benefits are nice, like healthcare, dental, all that stuff. But it is like time to leave and time for me to strike out on my own. And I think the same is true for you. I know you're no longer with Fold, but you now are basically doing, you've left Fold and now you're basically doing your own thing. Kind of basically the same thing that I'm doing. You left your fintech company and now want to do your own thing. So
yeah, dude, I'm super stoked for you because I know you're gonna love it and you're set up to succeed. You've got your social media following and you've got a content plan, and we both have sort of plans in place, and we've been scheming this for a year together of like what we're going to be doing and providing. And I'm so stoked because I think that we're in the right place. Look at the stand I'm using for my microphone right now. Sovereign Individual. This is a great book to read to get really stoked about becoming more sovereign in the information age, which we are doing, my friend. Okay. We are doing what we can to provide value to the world. I'm going to continue building this new project and reading lots of books, tweeting lots of toxic shit at Bitcoiners, and you will continue building out your channel and writing books, and I'm just really looking forward to it, man. I think that we got a lot of great times ahead of us. Looking forward to our adventure. Looking forward to you getting out in the world for the first time for real. And I think it's going to be great. Oh, my shirt's starting to peek in here. Check it out.
Nice. Apes Together Strong. I love it.
The
I have
Diane
that
Fossey
shirt.
game.
I actually have that shirt. I have the same one.
Only the real ones got this one.
Yeah. I didn't cut out, or did you cut out the sides, or does it come like that?
Dude, when I came to Mexico, I literally cut the sleeves off of everything. It's so fucking hot here.
Okay.
All
okay,
my shirts became like cut off shirts.
Gotcha. Makes sense.
Well, man, I agree. I think that this is a good time to wrap it up. Is there any other things that you want to add before I ask you your final question, which is a surprise? I didn't tell you it.
I'm kind of now curious to hear what the final question is.
I feel like so many podcasts have like their last question they ask. So this is one that I feel like would be a good one for you. For the average person who's not super nerdy into finance, or maybe doesn't even know what the hell we're talking about with like GME and Bitcoin and all this, just like the average Joe, what do you think is the best thing that they can be doing right now to set themselves up for this decade and what's coming, what you think is coming? What should they be doing to be set up to prosper and protect their family and maybe come out even better on the other side?
I think there's two things, right? Or maybe a couple things. One is education. You need to learn the basics. It's like learning the basics of health. Like, it's one thing to know about you should work out and you should do things to take care of yourself. Another thing to actually just read even just one book on health to kind of cement it in your mind. I think education. The Bitcoin standard is a great place to start. The Fiat standard I've heard is also really good. I have a huge book list on my website you can check out.
Dude, me too. There's so many.
Massive. And I have my own book list, which is huge too, which I can send out to anyone if they want to DM me and ask for that personally. But other than that, I would say buy Bitcoin, buy GME, buy assets that have infinite demand and limited supply. And so those are the two at the top of the list. Get ready for a wealth transfer that is bigger than anything that we've seen before in history.
And that's big. Like, this is an opportunity to like be in a better position after. Like, you don't have to just brace for impact and like just expect that things are going to get worse for you. Like, there's going to be chaos, but if you make the right moves, you're going to be in a great spot. Like, there's huge opportunity here.
Huge. Yeah, every monetary change comes with massive problems with massive opportunities. I mean, there's a lot of startups were built in the 2008 recession. Even though it was a difficult time, it also created a lot of opportunity because as you wipe out some of these businesses, you create opportunity for new ones to come in. And so the same thing is true. Like, the death of the fiat monetary system is not going to be easy. It's not going to be quick. It's not going to be painless. But what comes next, I think, will portray prosperity on a level that people are not accustomed with. Like, people are going to be surprised when year after year your wages keep growing and everything gets cheaper, and you're like, "What? The house is 10% cheaper this year, and it's 10% cheaper the next year, and 12% the next year, and my food is cheaper, and everything just keeps getting cheaper." It's like, what is going on? You'll be completely blown away. So
we didn't even get into that, like how the new system is good. Like, the Bitcoin standard is going to be so much better for everybody, except for the top 0.001%. Like, everything will suddenly just become easier and make sense. Like, when you save your money, it should get better over time, and when you work for something, it should be able to maintain its value. And people don't really think about how many effects that will have on just society at large, like how happy people will be. People will have much more free time. You won't be constantly under this boot of fiat hamster wheel just pushing you. Like, you basically just have to work your ass off just to be able to eat, and you can't even have a good diet because that's too expensive. And relationships are falling apart everywhere because there's so much financial stress. All these things come down to the money, and Bitcoin fixes that problem. So that to me is why Bitcoin is the end game. It always was. And I'm really glad that I got you on that, and we're going to keep fighting this fight and getting info out there and helping people learn ourselves too, because heck, I'm definitely no expert. Yeah. There's so much to look at, and I think you would agree. I'm
excited for that, man. Quitting my job will be a good thing because I can dive back into this full time. And I think the amount of knowledge and just, research I can do while doing this full time will be incredible. And I'm hopeful that my content will just get better and better over time, and that plays out on the stage of public opinion, right? If people actually liking the new stuff I put out. So I would say if you're gonna get ready for this next upcoming monetary reset, those are the two biggest ones. The other thing you can do is reduce your liabilities, reduce your debt, reduce your costs, live as cheaply as possible, and just stack GME, stack Bitcoin, and keep learning. Like, get ready to ride the wave, because it's coming, and if you're on the right side of things, I think you'll be absolutely fine. So this isn't a zombie apocalypse. This isn't going to be, the death. You're not going to be, shooting your neighbor for a can of beans. It's going to be a change. Some people are going to lose a lot, but a lot of people are going to make a lot. And if you want to be on the right side, buy some Bitcoin, buy some GME.
Beautiful, man. I appreciate you so much, dude. Thank you for coming on. I think it's a good place to wrap it up, just like right at 2 hours. So thank you so much, sir. I'm really glad we got to do this, and exciting times ahead. I'll see you in a couple of weeks, dude. I'm coming back to the homeland. We'll have to go on a hike and see some nature, go and walk on a beach and just chat about all this shit. And dude, there's so many things that I have like in my mental notes we didn't even touch on. So we'll be doing this again.
We'll do a follow-up episode for sure.
Oh, of course.
For sure.
There will be a series for sure. So
more in depth than this one for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where I maybe a little bit less ranting about shitcoins and a little bit more looking forward.
Yeah.
I gotta get some stuff off my chest.
I can imagine. Yeah.
Awesome, man. Appreciate you, dude. I'll talk to you later. Thank you so much for this.
Yep. Sounds good. See you later, Ben. Have a good one.
Peace.